I didn't plan any of this. I want you to know that up front, I'm not the kind of man who schemes or plots or lays traps. I'm 67 years old. I fix things around the house on weekends. I drink my coffee black. I fall asleep before the 10 o'clock news. That's who I am, or at least, that's who I was before the summer my son-in-law moved into my guest room and I found out my wife had been lying to me for 8 months. My name's Edwin. I live outside of Knoxville, Tennessee, in a house I built mostly with my own hands in 1991. 3 bedrooms, a wraparound porch, a detached garage where I still keep my father's workbench. My wife Lorraine and I raised our daughter Stephanie in that house, pushed her on the tire swing in the backyard, drove her to soccer practice, piano lessons, the orthodontist 3 towns over. We did all of it together, Lorraine and I, 32 years of marriage. I thought I knew every room in that woman's heart. I was wrong about that. Stephanie is 31. She met Miles at a work conference in Nashville about 3 years ago. He's in logistics, whatever that means exactly. He drove a nice truck, laughed at my jokes, shook my hand firmly when we met. I didn't love him right away, but I respected him. And when Stephanie told me they were getting married, I told her I was happy if she was happy. That was good enough for me. The trouble started in April. Miles had taken a new position with a distribution company out of Chattanooga, and the commute was grinding him down. Stephanie called me on a Sunday afternoon and asked, in that careful voice she uses when she wants something she's not sure I'll give, whether Miles could stay with us during the week and drive home on weekends until they found a place closer to his office. I said yes. Of course I said yes. She's my daughter. He moved a bag into the guest room on a Monday. He was quiet, kept to himself mostly, ate whatever Lorraine put in front of him without complaint. I thought it was a little odd that he seemed more comfortable in my house than I expected a grown man to be, but I didn't read into it. I'm not a suspicious person by nature. I spent 30 years as a civil engineer. I trust load-bearing numbers. I trust what I can measure. What I didn't measure was how often Lorraine laughed when Miles was in the room. It wasn't obvious. I want to be clear about that, because I've replayed it 100 times, and I keep asking myself how I missed it. And the answer is that it didn't look like anything at the time. Lorraine has always been warm with people. She baked him banana bread the first week. She asked about his family in Asheville. She refilled his coffee without being asked. I thought she was just being a good host. I thought she liked having someone young in the house again. Our last kid had been gone for 6 years. I figured she missed the noise. It was a Tuesday evening in late May when I first felt the ground shift under me. I'd come home from a site visit earlier than expected. One of the contractors had sent everyone home at 2 o'clock because of a water main issue. I pulled into the driveway just after 3 and noticed Miles's truck was still there, which was unusual. He normally left by 8. I went into the garage, set my keys on the counter, called out for Lorraine. Nothing. I walked through the kitchen, into the hallway, and I heard voices in the back of the house. Low, close, coming from the direction of the sunroom. I stopped walking. I don't know why I stopped. Some instinct I didn't know I had. I stood in the hallway for a moment, my work bag still on my shoulder, and I listened. I couldn't make out words, just the cadence, the rhythm of 2 people talking the way people talk when they think no one else is home. I turned around and walked back out through the garage. I sat in my truck for 20 minutes. Then I drove to the hardware store and bought a box of screws I didn't need. And when I came back an hour later, Miles's truck was gone, and Lorraine was in the kitchen starting dinner like nothing had happened. I didn't say a word that night. I ate my pork chop. I watched the news. I went to bed. But something had cracked open in me, and I couldn't close it back up. I called Stephanie the next afternoon from my office with the door shut. I didn't tell her what I'd seen. I just asked how things were going, whether she and Miles were finding any houses they liked. She said yes, they'd looked at 2 places the previous weekend and were going back this Saturday to see a third one. I asked if Miles was enjoying the commute from our place. She laughed a little and said he seemed comfortable there, maybe too comfortable. I laughed too, but my stomach was tight the entire call. I started paying attention after that, not in a dramatic way. I wasn't installing cameras or hiring anyone. I just started noticing. The way Lorraine got a little quieter when Miles's truck wasn't in the driveway. The way she found reasons to stay home when I suggested we drive up to Gatlinburg for the weekend something we'd done every summer for 20 years. The way she checked her phone at the dinner table, which she had never done in 32 years of marriage. Not once, not even when Stephanie was a teenager, and every other parent we knew was glued to their screen. I bought a small voice recorder at Best Buy, a Sony, $69. I felt like a fool buying it. I felt like I was doing something shameful just by being there in that aisle. I drove home with it in my jacket pocket, and I sat in the truck for a long time before I went inside. I put it in the sunroom, under the little side table near the couch, behind a wicker basket Lorraine keeps spare blankets in. I turned it on before I left for work the following Thursday morning. I almost didn't listen to it. I drove around with the recorder in my glove compartment for 2 days without playing it back. I kept telling myself there was nothing on it. I kept telling myself I was being paranoid, that I was the problem, that I had taken something innocent and built a whole ugly story around it. I'd been under a lot of stress. The Farragut Overpass project had been delayed twice. Maybe I was just looking for somewhere to put my frustration. Then I played it. I'm not going to describe everything I heard. I'm 67 years old, and some things are not mine to repeat. What I will tell you is that it was enough. It was more than enough. Their voices were clear. The words were clear. There was no other interpretation. I sat in my truck in the Best Buy parking lot, and I listened to 11 minutes of audio, and I felt something leave my body that I don't think has ever come back. Not grief exactly. Not rage. Something quieter than both. Like a door closing very slowly and very finally. I drove home. I put the recorder back in my glove compartment. I ate dinner. I asked Lorraine how her day was. She said fine. She asked me the same. I said fine. We watched television. We went to bed. I did not sleep. The next morning, a Saturday, I called Stephanie. I asked if she could meet me for lunch at the Cracker Barrel in the North City, just the two of us, without Miles. She hesitated for maybe half a second and then said yes. She was already in a booth when I arrived. She had her mother's dark hair and her grandmother's eyes, and she was holding her iced tea with both hands the way she always does when she's nervous. She looked at me when I sat down, and I could see she had already read something in my face, because she set the tea down carefully and said, "Dad, what's wrong?" It wasn't a question. She knew. I put the recorder on the table between us. I didn't say anything. She looked at it. She looked at me. Then she reached out and picked it up, and I watched my daughter's face while she listened, and I will carry that memory for the rest of my life. She set the recorder down after about 2 minutes. She didn't cry. Her jaw was set. She looked out the window at the parking lot and was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "How long have you known?" I told her about the day in the hallway, the voices in the sunroom. She nodded slowly, like she was fitting a piece into a puzzle she had been working on without me. "Dad," she said, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to let me finish before you say anything." She had suspected for 6 weeks. She'd found a text on Miles's phone back in late April, the morning after they'd had an argument, and he'd left his phone on the kitchen counter, and she'd accidentally knocked it off and it lit up on the floor. She hadn't meant to read it, but she had, and she hadn't confronted him yet because she was doing something else instead. She had been preparing. I don't know where my daughter learned to think the way she does. Not from me, I don't think, though I hope some of it came from me. She had spent 6 weeks quietly, methodically building a case. She had consulted a family law attorney in Oak Ridge, a woman named, and she wouldn't tell me the name, said she'd handle that part. She had documented what she could document. She had also, and this was the part that stopped me cold, spoken to a financial advisor about what assets were considered marital property in Tennessee and which ones were not, and she had, with the help of that attorney, identified which accounts had been opened before our marriage and which ones hadn't. She slid a piece of paper across the table to me, names, account numbers, dates. She said, "Mom has been moving money. Not large amounts at once, nothing that would trigger anything. Small transfers, over months, from a joint savings account into an account I didn't know existed, registered in Lorraine's maiden name at a credit union in Maryville. My daughter had found it because she had borrowed Lorraine's laptop 2 months ago to print a boarding pass and had seen the browser history. $43,000, that's what she had moved, over 8 months. I stared at that paper for a long time. I had worked 30 years. I'd built that house. I'd managed the budget, handled the taxes, maintained the investments. I'd made sure there was always enough. And while I was doing all of that, the woman I had built it with had been tunneling out beneath my feet, passing money through a hole I didn't know was there. Apparently, planning a life she hadn't bothered to tell me about. I folded the paper carefully and put it in my shirt pocket. My daughter reached across the table and put a hand over mine. She said, "We're going to do this right, Dad. No blow-ups, no screaming. We're going to be smart." I nodded. I wasn't sure I was capable of being smart right then, but I trusted her. We spent 2 hours at that Cracker Barrel. We ordered food neither of us ate. We made a plan. The first thing I did was call my own attorney, a man I'd known since Stephanie was in middle school, a guy named, I'll call him my attorney. He's been practicing family law in Knox County for 30 years. I sat in his office the following Monday morning and I told him everything. I put the recorder on his desk the same way I put it on the table in front of Stephanie. He listened. He made notes. He did not change his expression. Then he told me what to do and what not to do. He told me not to move any money. He told me not to change passwords. He told me not to confront Lorraine. He told me to behave exactly as I had been behaving for 2 more weeks, while he filed the paperwork and a forensic accountant reviewed the joint accounts. 2 weeks. I came home every evening. I sat across the dinner table from my wife. I asked about her day, she asked about mine. We watched our shows, we went to bed. I lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling, and I thought about 32 years. And I thought about the guest room down the hall where Miles's overnight bag was still sitting on the luggage rack. And I breathed in and out and I did not say a word. Miles, to his credit, seemed to sense something had shifted. He started leaving earlier in the mornings. He was home less on weekday evenings. He got quieter at dinner. Whether Lorraine noticed his retreat, I can't say. If she did, she didn't mention it to me. There was a moment, about 10 days in, when I almost broke. A Sunday afternoon. Lorraine and I were sitting on the porch, the way we used to when Stephanie was young, and we'd watch the fireflies come up from the yard after dark. She handed me a glass of sweet tea, and she smiled at me. And for 1 second it was 32 years ago, and we were just 2 people sitting on a porch in Tennessee. And I wanted so badly to live in that second forever. But I couldn't, because the second wasn't real, and I had learned, too late maybe, that I needed to live in what was real. On the 15th day, my attorney called and said we were ready. He came to the house on a Wednesday afternoon when I knew Miles would be gone, and I had asked Lorraine to be home. He brought the paperwork. He sat at my kitchen table, the table I bought at an estate sale in 1994, the table where we'd eaten 30 years of meals, and he laid out the documents in front of Lorraine with the quiet efficiency of a man who had done this many times before. The divorce filing, the asset inventory, the forensic accountant's report, itemizing every transfer from the joint savings account, the account in her maiden name, the full 43,000, documented transaction by transaction. Lorraine went very still. She didn't look at me at first. She looked at the papers. She turned one page, then another. Then she looked up and she looked at me and she said, in a voice I barely recognized, "Edwin, I can explain." I said, "You don't need to." And I meant it. I didn't need the explanation. I had the recorder. I had the bank statements. I had 32 years of real memories that I would carry out of that house intact, without her revision of them. My attorney walked her through the terms. Because she had transferred marital assets without disclosure, the forensic findings significantly affected how the court would view the division of property. She would not be walking away with half of everything. She would not be walking away with the house. She had a week to find somewhere else to stay while the proceedings moved forward. She left that evening with 2 suitcases. I stood on the porch and watched her car go down the driveway and turn onto the road. Miles's truck was gone from the guest room by the following morning. He'd come in sometime overnight and cleared out his bag. I found the guest room stripped, bed made with the hospital corners. Lorraine always insisted on, the window cracked open the way it had been since May. I closed the window. I stripped the bed. I put the sheets in the wash. I called Stephanie. She answered on the first ring. I told her it was done. She was quiet for a moment and then she said, "Are you okay, Dad?" I stood in the guest room with the phone pressed to my ear and the morning sun coming through the window I just closed, and I thought about what okay meant at 67, after 32 years in a house you built with your own hands. I will be, I said, and I think I meant it. The divorce was finalized in October, 4 months later. Lorraine retained what she was entitled to under the revised terms. I kept the house, I kept the garage and my father's workbench. I kept the porch where I drink my coffee every morning now, alone, which I am still getting used to. Stephanie and Miles separated that same month. She had consulted the attorney in Oak Ridge before she ever confronted him. She had protected herself first, the way I should have taught her to do, or maybe the way she figured out on her own because she's smarter than I gave her credit for. She's doing fine. She's renting a place in Maryville, about 20 minutes from me. We have lunch on Saturdays, usually at the Cracker Barrel in the Nora City, always in the same booth. She still orders iced tea, still holds it with both hands. I'm not angry anymore most days. Anger takes more energy than I have to spare at this point in my life. What I feel instead is something harder to name. A kind of clear-eyed steadiness, like a building after the scaffolding comes down. All the temporary supports removed, and what's left is just the structure, standing on its own. I still fix things around the house on weekends. I still drink my coffee black. I sleep better now than I did in May, which surprised me when I noticed it. I thought I would fall apart after all of this, and instead I wake up most mornings and the first thing I think is not about Lorraine, or Miles, or the recorder, or the $43,000. The first thing I think is whether I need to sand the boards on the north side of the porch before the weather turns. There's something to be said for a man who still knows what needs doing. I just wish I had learned sooner that knowing what needs doing also means not looking away when something's wrong. Not from kindness, not from comfort, not from comfort, not from 32 years of believing a person is who you always believed them to be. The recorder is still in my glove compartment. I haven't thrown it away. I'm not sure why. Maybe because it's $69 and it still works. Maybe because some part of me needs to know it's there. Or maybe because it reminds me that I trusted my gut when it finally spoke up, and that for once in my life, I listened. I keep coming back to the moment Stephanie put her hand over mine at that Cracker Barrel table. Not the recorder, not the bank statements, not the attorney or the paperwork, or the October morning the divorce was finalized. That one gesture, a hand on mine, steady and certain, while I was still trying to figure out which way was up. What I've come to understand is that nothing about what happened to me was random. Lorraine made choices. Miles made choices. And for a long time I made a choice too. The choice to not look too closely, to give the benefit of the doubt, to value the peace of a quiet evening over the discomfort of an honest question. I'm not saying I deserved what happened. I don't believe that, but I do believe that when we stop paying attention to what's right in front of us, because looking away is easier, because we've built something and we don't want to see cracks in it, we leave a door open that someone else will eventually walk through. That's the part that stays with me. Not the betrayal itself, but the months before it, when something in me already knew and I chose not to listen. There's a cost to that kind of willful blindness. I paid it. But here's the other side of that same coin. My daughter paid attention. Stephanie found that text, and instead of falling apart, she got quiet and she got smart. She called an attorney. She talked to a financial advisor. She built a case out of facts before she ever raised her voice. 31 years old, she did what I hadn't done at 67. She looked at a hard truth, and she didn't flinch. And then she figured out the right way to move through it. I think about the kind of character that takes. Not just courage, though it took that too. It took clarity. The ability to think straight when your chest is on fire and the person you planned your life around turns out to be someone different than you thought. That kind of clear-headedness doesn't come from nowhere. She'd been building it quietly her whole life, and I hadn't fully seen it until that booth in Lenore City. What happened to us, to me, to Stephanie, was not the end of anything worth keeping. The house is still standing. The porch still faces east. The workbench in the garage still has my father's handwriting on a piece of tape along the edge, marking where the chisels go. What was real remained real. What was built on something false collapsed on its own weight, the way things built on false foundations always eventually do. I'm not a man who talks much about wisdom or growth or any of that. It's not how I was raised. But I'll say this, getting through something like this intact, not bitter, not broken, not hardened past the point of repair, that takes something. It takes knowing who you are when everything you thought you knew gets pulled out from under you. It takes the willingness to sit in a very dark room for a while and not do anything stupid. And it takes being honest with yourself about what you missed, what you should have seen, and what you're going to do differently when you come out the other side. I came out the other side, we both did. And on Saturday mornings, in a booth at Cracker Barrel, I sit across from my daughter and I drink bad coffee, and I think that's more than enough.